talked about the family, we're going to talk about our social development outside of the family, which mostly takes place in the peer group. So what are peers and what's a peer group? They're the people around you that are not friends and family, but who have equal status to you. This can be a sibling or a friend, but what matters with peers is they have equal status in terms of being of a similar age, or a similar developmental age, or at a similar life milestone point. They also might be similar to you in terms of their behavioral, cognitive, and emotional development. So this is the idea that when you are a preschooler, your peers are other preschoolers. When you're a teenager, your peers are other teenagers. When you're an adult, your peers may be adults of any age, depending on where you're at in your life and what decisions you're making. Your peers might be people going through a divorce of all different ages, or getting married of all different ages, or becoming a parent, or grieving of all different ages. And so peers can also be coworkers from lots of different developmental ages. You might be working in an area where there's some teens and some elders and some middle adults. Peers can be very diverse. For the purposes of this lecture, we're mainly focusing on peers in infancy, childhood, and adolescence, but we can really see how some of this could apply across the lifespan. So we're going to start off with a neat phenomenon that often helps us to engage with our peers, and that is the phenomenon known as play. So play is awesome. It's really cool work that we do, and it's the work of toddlers and children to help them understand their worlds. Play is work. It's not nothing, and it's very important to allow kids to have time to play. In particularly, a really important type of play is free play. Free play is unstructured play. And this is the idea that rather than signing them up for piano and signing them up for riding lessons and signing them up for sports leagues and signing them up for scouts, rather than that, you are giving them unstructured time where there's no adults telling them how to structure their time. It's possible for children to structure their time, and that's okay. That's still considered free play. So if a group of neighborhood kids just get together and they go up into a treehouse and they decide what they're going to do in that time, or they're playing in a sandbox, or they're just playing with some toys on the floor and they decide what they're going to do, that is free play. What's not considered free play is if they decide to use screens. Now they're not going to get the benefits we otherwise would in free play. Now they're passively absorbing or sometimes actively absorbing what's going on in the screen. So free play is screen-free, unstructured time that a child spends. And this is amazingly good for their development. It's good for their cognitive development, it's good for their linguistic development, but it's also really essential to their social development. You can have free play by yourself. Free play by yourself can help with creativity, it can help with learning and adventure, it can help you understand your interests and your hobbies. But free play with other kids can teach us about social skills and sharing and regulating their emotions. You think of a kid who goes to a structured dance class and they don't get to interact with the kids, they just show up and they listen to the instructions and then they leave. They're not really learning those social skills. Or a kid who shows up for piano lessons and they do the piano and then they leave, they're not really working on their creativity. And rather letting them just play freestyle at the piano, or rather letting them just talk to other kids and dance freestyle with the other kids, is really beneficial. Structured play can help them learn one specific skill set that's very narrow in their development, but free play can help them to broadly develop their development in a more holistic sense. Now, one subtype of free play is pretend play, and this is really when we're using symbolism to make believe. This can help us with perspective taking if we're pretend playing to play house or doctor or school. And this type of role playing isn't just about perspectives now, it's about understanding the social norms in our society and our culture. When a group of kids are doing pretend play together, this is a very elaborate form of play, and it requires a lot of nuance. You might have one child say, okay, we're going to play doctor and I'm going to be a doctor. But then the other child says, well, I want to be the doctor. They have to learn to negotiate and cooperate. You might have some kids that really excel at this and they become the leaders, and you have other kids that fall back and comfortably in the follower position, but then when they're playing with another group of kids on another day, the followers are now the leaders, and it's great. It allows them to learn different types of play styles. And this allows so much creativity, whether it's the floor is made of lava or their broom is a unicorn, it really helps them to develop. Another type of pretend play is something that might happen when kids are solo and they invent an imaginary friend. We used to be worried about imaginary friends. We used to be concerned if that was a link to something more detrimental for the kids, but it's not. We actually find the kids that have imaginative friends are more likely to be very social and outgoing and have higher levels of social understanding, social competence, and emotional IQ. So imaginary friends are totally safe and totally fine as long as the imaginary friend isn't telling them to do anything too delinquent. So free play and pretend play are awesome, but we tend to find that play develops in an age-appropriate way over time. And so what happens is when we're very young, from birth until about age 2, the type of play we engage in is non-social or solitary. If we think about a newborn baby or a 3-month baby who's playing on their little play mat and they're just kind of learning to reach and learning to swat at things, or playing with a little toy in their mobile, or shaking a rattle, that's not necessarily social play. It might be parent initiated or in response to a parent. You might have someone come over and smile at the baby and talk to them. And that really looks like it's non-solitary play, but it's a little bit different from our next stage of play. Our next stage of play is called parallel play. And this roughly happens somewhere between 2 and 3 years of age where it comes and develops, but it can happen a little bit before. We can see some 1-year-olds and 18-month-year-olds develop it. And so what parallel play is when we're interested in the other person, but there's still little interaction. So rather than just putting a rattle in someone's hand now, we're actually playing. And so we might be playing with a ring stacker, or doing some building blocks, or putting together an infant puzzle. And there's another peer. Remember, we're more interested in peers than parents here. There's another infant or another child who is also playing in our proximity, but we're not really interacting with them. We're not talking with them or smiling at them or showing them what we're doing yet, but we tend to look at them. So this is the idea. Let's say 2-year-olds might be in the same room, and one of them might be playing with a ring stacker on one side of the room, while the other one is playing with some blocks. And they may eventually make eye contact or look at each other, but they're not really talking about each other, and they're not really interacting. That's considered to be parallel play. The next step up from parallel play, which also kind of overlaps in the time it develops, it could develop right around the same time or a little bit after, is associative play. In associative play, what happens now is those 2 toddlers or preschoolers are using the same things, but not together. So now instead of one of them playing with a ring stacker and one of them playing with Lego, they're both playing with Lego, and the Lego's coming from the same pile, but they're building different things. And they're not really discussing about sharing blocks yet. They're not really negotiating who gets what block. This could be 3-year-olds who haven't really gotten the social skills yet to say, can I have that one? And so they might just be taking them, and they're not really cooperating yet, and they're building 2 different things. A key thing here with associative play is there is a sharing element. So we could have 2 young children who are coloring and using the same crayons. And we could see a bit of frustration if somebody has the purple crayon and the other one wants it, and they don't yet know how to cooperate and ask for that crayon. That's pretty common at this point in time. And so it's the idea that they're doing their own thing, they're not drawing a picture together. The frustration may emerge regarding the sharing of resources. Now, the last type of a play to emerge is really the social play. Again, some children develop this earlier and some develop it later. Once it develops, it tends to be pretty common though, and this is cooperation. This is the idea now that when they want to, they can share and do one task that has the same goal. So 2 kids can build something together out of Lego where they're both adding on to the structure, or they can both draw a picture together, or they can pretend play together. And this requires a lot of negotiation and a lot of give and take and a lot of perspective taking and a lot of good explanation and language skills. And so this is a really complex milestone. Even when we get there at 4.5, even if we have the capacity to perform social play, we may still go back some time and do non-social, parallel, or associative. You might find yourself doing parallel all the time in waiting rooms with other adults. You might be playing on your phone, they're playing on their phone, and once in a while you notice each other, but you're not talking to the other person. You might also have associative play with another adult, and this might be if you're at a paint your own pottery place and you have to share the paints or share the brushes with someone who's sitting in your proximity that you don't know, and they're not your friend, they're just an acquaintance or a peer in this situation, and you're asking for the brushes or asking for certain colors back and forth. So even adults may engage in parallel or associative play, but we tend to find a lot of us prefer social play once we're able to do it, but not everyone. And that's why we also have to talk about our play preferences. So once we get over age 5, once we become more school-aged, and most of us have the cognitive capacity for social play, some of us prefer social play almost all the time. In fact, during free play, that is unstructured play that's screen-free, we tend to find a lot of kids prefer either dyadic or group play. Dyadic play is when you're with just one other child. This might be if you're skipping ropes together, or one child's pushing you on a swing during unstructured free play in a playground, or you're talking to another one, or you're singing songs, or you're chasing each other or playing catch. Dyadic play is pretty common. We also find group play, that's 3 or more individuals. They might be playing a game of catch or a large team sport or a dodgeball game, or they might be sitting around talking to each other during free play. So a lot of kids choose social, dyadic, or group play, but not everyone. We also find some children, when given the opportunity, tend to engage more in solitary activities. And these solitary activities can be different. Some of them include solitary constructive or solitary engaged activities. This is when a singular child is doing something constructive on their own. They might be building a sandcastle, or doing a puzzle, or building a ring stacker, or building Lego, or reading a book, or skipping with a skipping rope, or shooting basketball by themselves. That's all considered solitary engaged. It's all constructive, and during solitary engaged play, the child might be very happy and content to be by themselves. But there's another type of alone behavior called solitary reticent, or just reticence. And this is the idea that an individual is spending time alone, but they don't look like they're engaging in anything. They might be thinking, they might be deep in thought, but what we see on the outside is a child who's just wandering, who's just staring up at the ceiling, or they might be just sitting still, picking at the grass in a field, or fiddling with their shoelace. And it's the idea that if it's an indoor after-school program, they just might be sitting on the radiator playing with a scarf the whole time and not really doing anything constructive like building a puzzle or completing a task. Sometimes these solitary reticent children want to engage with other kids, but they're very shy and very nervous. So they may actually just stand just on the outside of a group or a dyad and want to invite themselves into the group, but are too nervous and too hesitant to do so. We call this the hover effect. This idea you might have a group of kids all standing around talking and socializing, and then outside that circle, there's a little hoverer outside, standing awkwardly, wanting to be invited in, but also too scared to invite themselves in because they don't want to be rejected. And rather than getting rejected, they'd rather just stand there in this kind of purgatory between doing their own thing and getting invited into the group. This is really a marker of social anxiety or shyness. And so what decides a child's preferences? Well, we have to talk about the ideas of loneliness and aloneliness. Loneliness is the idea you desire more rich, intimate social interaction than what you're currently receiving, that your solitude has become negative and that you wish you were around others. Some of our reticent kids might be experiencing that. But then there's also this notion of aloneliness, and this is the idea that you actually are socially fatigued and you want out of the dyad or out of the group, and you just want to spend some time alone. And some of our reticent or solitary engaged kids might also be experiencing that, where they just prefer to be alone and they've had enough people time for the time being.